Hello and welcome back to the Ben Pollard Show. The Democrats debated in Miami, Florida last night. And while Hillary was in Florida, she went to Tampa to stump. And, I don't particularly care for Hillary Clinton, but I agree with some of what she says. The problem with Hillary Clinton is you don't know if that's what she actually believes or if that's what she's saying just to get elected. I mean, she changes her position depending on which way the wind blows. I took a look at her website a few days ago, and now she's saying that she's going to make Wall Street pay their fair share, which is a line that Bernie Sanders has been using for years, that he wants to make Wall Street and the wealthy pay their fair share. Now, with Hillary, she may be talking about paying their fair share to her for her speeches. I mean, she gets paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to speak to these Wall Street firms. And they're not paying all that money just to hear her speak. They want something in return. They expect something in return. They wouldn't be giving her all that money if they didn't expect something in return. She's changed her position on a lot of things. Some of the things she's changed her mind on. As a young person, back in the 60s, she campaigned for Barry Goldwater, and as recently as, I believe it was 1993, she said that in her heart she was a conservative, but that the Republican Party had changed.
No.
I mean, did you ever, back in the 60s, between when I believe you were a Goldwater girl and
That's right.
whatever you became politically?
That's right. And I feel like my political beliefs are rooted in the conservatism that I was raised with. I don't recognize this new brand of republicanism that's afoot now, which I consider to be very reactionary, not conservative in many respects. I'm very proud that I was a Goldwater girl.
The Republican Party hasn't changed very much. I mean, they've been a radical party for a long time. I mean, in the 50s, they had the McCarthy hearings, which is pretty much pure fascism. And in the 60s, she was old enough to have witnessed some of that. She might have been young. I forget how old she is. I think she's like 68, 67, 68. So that still should have been fresh in the minds of people during the 60s. And she had to have been informed about the McCarthy era and all the abuses of government that existed in the Republican Party at the time. Yet she was still a Republican, and she promoted a lot of the bad policies of the 90s that led to the Great Recession, the deepest recession since the Great Depression. And now all of a sudden we're supposed to believe that she's this strong progressive. She's not a progressive. She's a moderate conservative, just like Barack Obama is, and just like Bill Clinton was. Moderate conservatives. So we've seen over and over again what conservative policies do to our country. Conservatism is a destructive force. But I was listening to her stump speech, and at one point she started talking about high-speed rail transportation, which I'm 100% behind. Let's go ahead and take a look at that clip.
A high-speed rail system from Tampa to Orlando would be amazing for this area. I mean, that would increase tourism, it would increase commerce, it would increase the opportunity for people to go quickly back and forth. It makes absolutely no sense, especially when we know that we're going to have to do high-speed rail if we're going to have a competitive economy in the 21st century. And if we're going to do more to fight climate change by getting more cars off the road and more passengers into high-speed
Bernie
rail.
Sanders has also advocated for, or not light rail, high-speed rail. Light rail is okay. It's better than riding a bus. When they started expanding the light rail system here in Denver, some people were advocating for a monorail system, which is what I wanted, because a monorail system has a smaller footprint. You don't need as much land. You can elevate monorail systems easily. All you need is pillars to support the monorail. But instead, they wanted Denver to be a kind of cosmopolitan city, and that's why they went with the light rail system. But Hillary, in her stump speech in Tampa yesterday, she talked about high-speed rail in Florida. And there was a plan for high-speed rail. I'll have to check to see what the status was on that. But it was supposed to go from northern Florida down to Miami. And this would be a great thing. The U.S. lags almost every other developed nation in high-speed rail transportation. We have a couple of small segments back east. They're building a line in California, a short line. I believe there's a line being developed from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. I'm not sure what the status is on that. But high-speed rail is far superior to air travel. First of all, you don't have to drive out to the airport and wait around. Rail transportation is extremely reliable. It's not so much at the mercy of weather. I mean, there's almost nothing that can stop a train. Air transportation is faster than trains if you're going a long distance. But if you're going less than 1,000 miles, high-speed rail is going to be far more efficient for you because the train can go right into downtown, so you don't have to drive out to an airport way on the outskirts of town or 15 miles outside of town. And it's far more comfortable than air travel. I hate flying. I feel like I'm stuck in a sardine can. They're noisy. You're always cramped. There's never enough leg room. I'm pretty tall. I'm 6'1", and there never seems to be enough leg room. And I get on a plane, and from the moment I get on, I can't wait to get off. And it's boring. You look out the window, and usually all you see are clouds. Whereas on a train, you get to see America. You get to travel through all sorts of environments. You get to travel through farm country, through mountainous areas, through wooded areas and plains. The purple mountains' majesty above the fruited plain. You get to see America in a train. You don't see shit in a plane except for clouds. And they could be clouds over Russia. They could be clouds over ISIS. But in a train, you get to see America. America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You can listen to some of my other songs on our YouTube channel. Where were we? Yeah, so Hillary is supporting high-speed rail. It's going to take a lot of effort to get caught up with other countries. I mean, China is massively developing high-speed rail transportation. Well, high-speed rail is a lot cleaner than air transportation. Jets use extremely dirty oil to power the jets, extremely dirty fuel. And that pumps a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, whereas trains run on electricity. And while it's true that you need to use some kind of fuel to power the power plants, that fuel can be solar power, water power, windmill power. Many different kinds of clean energy power can power the power plants. And eventually, if we get to 100% on clean energy, there will be no pollution from riding in trains. But of course, the problem with proposing something like high-speed rail transportation in America is Republicans. Republicans are an obstacle to pretty much anything good for our country. They don't want to invest any money in our country. They love dumping money in other countries for wars, but they don't want to invest anything in our country. It kind of makes you feel like Republicans don't really care very much for our country to do that. I mean, they're willing to spend trillions of dollars on wars over in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a lot of that money goes to rebuilding those countries, yet they don't want to spend anything on our country. So where exactly are their loyalties? I mean, back in the 50s, they had the Committee for Un-American Activities, where they were going after communists. There should seriously be an investigation on Republicans for un-American activities, because a lot of what they do is destructive to America. Their economic policies only help the wealthy, and they always lead to disaster. I mean, you look at the economic policies of the Republicans during the 90s and the 2000s, led to the greatest recession since the Great Depression, also led to the bailouts, the Enron scandal, massive debt, huge deficits. A lot of people don't understand the difference between the deficit and the debt. A deficit basically is revenues minus expenditures. If you get a negative number, it's a deficit. If you get a positive number, it's a surplus. And for the government, these are usually calculated monthly and yearly. On a typical year, if you have a relatively balanced budget, in a typical year, you'd have some months where you have a surplus and 1 month where you have deficits. And then at the end of the year, the end of the fiscal year, everything balances out. That's if you have an adequate tax rate in relation to the expenditures, payouts for all the bills, paying for the military and entitlements and pretty much all the everything that it takes to run the government and to run the country. 2 months ago, we actually had a budget surplus. In January, we had a budget surplus for that month. When I said that, people said, "No, we're $20 trillion in debt." That's true, we're nearly $20 trillion in debt, but for the month of January, revenues exceeded expenditures. And there are all sorts of accounting tricks that are done to make the budget look better. During the Bush years, the cost of the wars weren't put on the budget. They were just added directly to the debt. Currently, the money we spend on our foreign interventions is actually added to the budget. And that's why it's possible to have a budget surplus and still increase the debt. So with deficits, if you wind up with a deficit at the end of the fiscal year, the money needs to be borrowed. It needs to come from somewhere. And the amount that's borrowed is added to the debt. And Republicans have actually claimed that deficits don't matter. Dick Cheney actually made that completely asinine statement at one point, that deficits do not matter. Did he not understand that deficits lead to debt? We're currently spending $500 billion a year just on interest on the debt. We're approaching $20 trillion in debt. And most of that can be attributed to Republican policies. The Bush tax cuts, we had budget surpluses back in the 90s, and as soon as Bush cut taxes, we started running deficits. There were actually two series of tax cuts. One, I believe it was in 2001, and then another one in 2003. The second one, they couldn't even get a simple majority in the Senate. Dick Cheney had to cast the 51st vote so that it actually passed. I don't know why Democrats didn't filibuster that. I don't think any Democrats voted for it. And even half the Republicans wouldn't vote for it. Then you had increased spending due to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then came the Great Recession, which so many people lost their jobs, which reduced tax revenues and increased payouts for unemployment benefits. And all these things led to the massive increase in our nation's debt. And so what are Republican solutions, so-called solutions for these things? Cut government. You want to cut government more. What happens when you cut government? People get laid off. They lose their jobs, so they're not paying any taxes. Often they collect benefits, so entitlement payouts increase. These people don't have any money to spend, so they're not putting any money back into the economy. So that hurts other businesses. So those are some of the reasons. And also we don't get the services that we need. Republicans often cut things like regulation enforcement. And so when these things happen, when they don't enforce environmental regulations, we get things like the BP disaster and other disasters, which wind up costing us more money. It's usually the taxpayers that foot the bill for the cleanup of disasters like that. And at the same time, Republicans want to cut government. Basically, they want to fire people and cut services. At the same time, they want to cut taxes for the wealthy because they claim that if they cut taxes for the wealthy, they're going to hire more people. But businesses don't hire just because they have more money. They often just hide that money, or they use that money to buy other corporations. So you wind up with monopolies or near monopolies, and the rich just keep on getting richer. And one of the problems with Hillary is her plan is to cut taxes, cut more taxes. Now with Bernie, he's going to keep taxes exactly at the same rates they are right now for everybody who earns less than $250,000. People who earn over $1 million a year will have their tax rates increased to 50%. Those earning $250,000 a year to $1 million a year will also have their taxes go up. I forget what the numbers are. And that kind of tax plan will have no negative effect on the economy whatsoever. It may have a positive effect because we're not going to be running huge deficits. We'll be able to actually pay our bills without borrowing so much. I mean, if you look at cause and effect, Republican policies just do not work because you're relying on the charitable nature of large corporations, which is pretty much non-existent. Corporations exist for profits, nothing else. They're beholden to the shareholders. And that's why when they're paying Hillary Clinton all this money, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a 1-hour speech, the only reason they're doing that is because they believe that they're going to have some kind of return on their investment.